Here is something that used to drive me crazy. I would spend months preparing the soil, babying my transplants, watering, weeding, doing everything right. And then when harvest time rolled around, I would look at what I actually brought inside and think, that is it? All that work for this? If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. Most home gardeners leave an enormous amount of food on the table, sometimes literally, not because the garden failed, but because of how and when they harvest. The Amish do not have this problem. Walk up to an Amish family's kitchen in August, and you will see counters overflowing with tomatoes, canning jars lined up by the dozen, and a root cellar already filling for winter. These families pull staggering amounts of food from modest-sized plots, and a huge part of the reason is not what they plant or how they prepare the soil. It is what they do once the plants start producing. After 30 years of gardening, I started studying Amish harvest methods, specifically, and once I applied what I learned, my yields genuinely doubled in a single season. Today I am sharing 7 Amish harvest tips that can do the same for you. When we get to number 5, I'm going to show you a technique that solves one of the most frustrating problems in the garden, the one where your squash flowers beautifully but never sets fruit. And stay until the very end, because I have got a bonus tip that will change how you think about the last weeks of your growing season. Before we get into the list, there is one idea that drives everything the Amish do at harvest time, and it is worth understanding up front. For Amish families, the harvest is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice that starts the moment the first bean is ready and does not stop until frost shuts everything down. They do not wait for the big weekend haul. They bring in a little bit every single day, and that constant attention is what keeps the garden producing at its absolute peak. The Amish view. A garden that sits untouched for even a few days during the growing season is a garden that is slowing down. Once you start seeing harvesting as a daily habit rather than a weekend chore, everything about your garden changes. That mindset is the foundation for every tip on this list. The first tip is the single biggest thing you can do to increase your harvest. Pick early and pick often. I call this the pick to produce rule. And the science is simple. When fruit is allowed to fully ripen and stay on the vine, the plant gets a chemical signal that its job is done. It has successfully reproduced. It stops putting energy into new flowers and new fruit. But when you pick before it over-ripens, the plant does not get that signal. Instead, it keeps flowering, keeps setting fruit, and keeps producing, because as far as the plant knows, it has not finished reproducing yet. This is why Amish gardeners walk their beans and cucumbers every single day during peak season. Sometimes twice a day. A cucumber that is 6 inches long today will be 9 inches and seedy by tomorrow, and leaving it on the vine tells the plant to ease off. The same goes for zucchini, summer squash, peppers, and green beans. If you are only harvesting once a week on the weekend, you are missing the prime window on dozens of fruits and letting the plant slow down in the process. Here's a quick guide for your most common crops. Bush beans should be picked every 2 to 3 days when the pods snap cleanly and before you can see the seeds bulging through the skin. Cucumbers should come off at 6 to 8 inches for slicers, 2 to 4 inches for pickling types. Zucchini and summer squash are best at 6 to 8 inches. Once they get bigger than that, the plant diverts energy away from new fruit. Peppers should come off at full size if you want more to follow. I used to let my bell peppers sit until they turned red for the flavor, and I would get maybe 8 per plant all season. When I switched to the Amish method of picking most of them green and only letting a few color up, I started pulling 15 to 20 per plant. The difference was staggering, and the only thing I changed was how often I picked. Walk your garden each morning with a basket. If it is ready, pick it. Do not wait. The plant will reward you with more. The second tip is pinching, pruning and training your plants to put energy into fruit instead of foliage. Amish gardeners are not shy about cutting things off a healthy plant, and that is something a lot of home gardeners struggle with. It feels wrong to remove growth that looks perfectly fine. But every leaf, every side shoot, every sprawling vine uses energy. And if the plant is spending that energy growing in directions that do not produce food, you are losing yield. Tomatoes are the biggest example. If you grow indeterminate varieties, the ones that keep growing taller all season, you will notice little shoots that sprout in the crotch between the main stem and each branch. Those are called suckers. Left alone, each sucker becomes a full new stem with its own flowers and fruit, which sounds great until the plant has to divide its energy across all of them. The result is more, but smaller tomatoes that ripen later. Amish gardeners pinch most suckers when they are small, usually keeping the main stem and one or two strong secondary stems. The plant stays more compact, the fruit is larger, and everything ripens earlier because the energy is going exactly where you want it. The same principle applies to other crops. Basil should be pinched at the growing tip regularly to force branching. This gives you more leaves and a bushier, more productive plant. If you let basil grow straight up and flower, it goes bitter and stops producing. Pepper plants benefit from topping when they are about 8 to 10 inches tall. Pinch the very top growing point, and the plant branches lower and wider, which means more flowering sites and ultimately more peppers. It feels aggressive, but Amish gardeners do it without hesitation. For vining crops like melons and winter squash, prune the growing tips once several fruits have set. If you have 4 good butternut squash developing on a vine, cut the tip and let the plant pour all its energy into ripening those 4. They will be bigger, sweeter, and ready sooner. Also, trim off fruitless side runners. When a vine sends out long runners with no female flowers, that is energy going nowhere, and you can cut it without guilt. The third tip is something most modern gardeners skip: feeding the plants again mid-season, right when they need it most. Most people fertilize at planting and never think about nutrition again. But a tomato plant loaded with green fruit in July is burning through nutrients at an incredible rate. The fertilizer from May is long gone. Without a mid-season feed, the plant runs out of gas at the worst possible moment. Amish gardeners handle this with backup. The nutrients soak in with every backup. The nutrients soak in with every watering. For a faster boost, they use manure tea, aged manure in a burlap sack, steeped in a 5-gallon bucket of water for 3 to 5 days, then applied at the base of the plant. If you do not have manure, a handful of worm castings steeped overnight in a gallon of water makes a clean, odor-free alternative. The key is timing. Side dress when you see the first green fruits on tomatoes, when peppers flower heavily, and when squash vines begin to run. In zones 5 through 8, this usually falls between late June and mid-July. If production stalls or fruit stays small, mid-season nutrition is almost always the missing piece. I added this practice about 10 years ago, and the difference in late-season production was dramatic. Plants that used to fade in August kept going strong into September. If you are getting value from these harvest tips, take a second and hit subscribe. I share practical, experience-tested gardening advice every week, and there is a lot more coming. Now let us get into the rest of the list. The fourth tip separates Amish gardens from most backyard plots, and it is about which varieties you choose. Amish families deliberately plant early, mid, and late maturing varieties of the same crop so the harvest stretches across months instead of hitting all at once. Most home gardeners pick 1 tomato variety, plant 12 of them, and then end up with 100 ripe tomatoes in the same week. They are drowning in food for 10 days, and then they have nothing. The Amish approach is the opposite. Take tomatoes. An Amish family might plant an early variety like Stupis or Glacier that produces in 55 to 60 days after transplant, alongside a mid-season workhorse like Rutgers or Roma at 75 days, and a late variety, like Brandywine or Mortgage Lifter at 85 to 90 days. The result is a tomato harvest that starts in early July and does not stop until frost. You are never overwhelmed and never empty-handed. The same logic works with beans, peppers, and cucumbers. For bush beans, plant provider alongside Blue Lake and Dragon Tongue. For peppers, pair an early variety like Ace with a longer season type like California Wonder. This takes a little planning at seed ordering time, but it dramatically increases total food over a full season. The Amish do not think about one big harvest day, they think about harvest months, and that shift alone changes everything. You can push it even further by combining variety selection with succession planting, which means sowing the same variety in waves 2 to 3 weeks apart. An Amish garden might have 3 bean varieties, each planted twice, 3 weeks apart. That is 6 distinct harvest windows from a single crop. Once you see it laid out on paper, you understand why Amish kitchens never run empty. Number 5 is the technique I mentioned at the top, and it solves one of the most maddening problems in the garden. Plants that flower beautifully but never set fruit. This happens most often with squash, cucumbers, and melons, and the reason is usually poor pollination. These crops produce separate male and female flowers on the same plant, and they need bees to carry pollen from one to the other. If the bees are not showing up, whether because of cool weather, wind, pesticide use nearby, or just bad timing, you get flowers that wither and drop without producing anything. Amish gardeners do not leave this to chance. On still, cool mornings when bee activity is low, they hand pollinate. The method is simple. Find a male flower, which is the one on a straight, thin stem with no swelling at the base. Pick it off the plant, peel back the petals to expose the pollen-covered stamen, and gently press it into the center of a female flower. The female is easy to spot because it has a small bulge at the base of the bloom that looks like a tiny version of the fruit. That bulge is the ovary, and it becomes your squash or cucumber if pollination succeeds. One male flower can pollinate 2 to 3 females. Do this early in the morning when flowers are freshly open and pollen is most viable. You can also use a small paintbrush or cotton swab to transfer pollen if you prefer not to pick the male flower. In zones 4 through 8, the critical window is usually late June through July when squash and melon plants flower heavily. If you have been frustrated by zucchini plants that produce nothing but blossoms, this is almost certainly the answer. I spent 2 full seasons blaming my soil before an Amish neighbor showed me this trick in 30 seconds. That year I pulled more squash from 4 plants than I had gotten from 10 the year before. It is one of those techniques that feels almost too simple to work, but once you see fruit swell up the day after you hand pollinate, you will never skip it again. The 6th tip is something so simple it almost feels too obvious, but most gardeners get it wrong: harvesting at the right time of day. Amish families pick their produce in the early morning, right after the dew dries, but before the heat sets in. During the night, plants convert starches back into sugars and pull moisture up through their roots. By early morning, the sugar content in your tomatoes, peppers, beans, and greens is at its peak, and the tissues are fully hydrated and crisp. As the day heats up, plants lose moisture through their leaves, sugars begin converting to starch, and the produce becomes softer and less flavorful. This is not just about taste. It directly affects shelf life. Produce picked in the cool of the morning lasts significantly longer than produce picked in afternoon heat. A tomato picked at 7 in the morning will hold firm on your windowsill for days. The same tomato picked at 2 in the afternoon, warm and slightly dehydrated from sun exposure, will go soft much faster. Greens like lettuce, spinach, and kale are even more dramatic. Pick them in the morning and they stay crisp in the fridge for a week. Pick them in the heat and they wilt within a day or two, even with refrigeration. The Amish also handle produce gently at harvest. They do not toss tomatoes into a bucket. They lay them in a single layer in a flat basket. They do not yank beans off the plant. They hold the stem with one hand and snap the pod with the other, so they do not damage the branch and reduce future production. Cucumbers get cut from the vine with a knife rather than twisted off. These details matter because damaged produce rots faster and a damaged plant heals slower, which means fewer fruits down the line. Once I started treating the harvest like the Amish do, picking gently in the early morning, my produce lasted noticeably longer and my plants kept producing further into the season. The seventh and final tip squeezes the absolute last bit of production out of your season. Cutting plants back hard after the first harvest to force a second flush. This works especially well with basil, bush beans, and certain leafy greens like cilantro and arugula. When your first planting of bush beans finishes its main production and the plants look tired, most people rip them out. Amish gardeners cut the plants back to about 4 inches above the ground, give them a side dressing of compost, and water well. Within 2 to 3 weeks, those bean plants push out new growth, flower again, and give you a genuine second harvest from the same planting. Basil responds even more dramatically. When it starts to bolt and send up flower spikes, most gardeners consider it done. But if you cut the entire plant back by about 2/3, removing all flower buds and most of the top growth, then feed the roots with compost tea, the plant pushes out a whole new set of tender, flavorful leaves. I have gotten 3 full cuts from a single basil plant in one season. Cilantro is trickier because it bolts fast in heat, but if you catch it early and cut before the flower stalks harden, you can sometimes get one more flush before it finishes. I want to be straightforward. This works best in zones 5 through 8, where the season is long enough for recovery. In zones 3 and 4, your second flush might get caught by early frost. It also depends on plant health. Diseased or severely stressed plants will not respond well. But for healthy plants with growing season ahead of them, this is free food from work already done. The Amish never waste a plant that still has life in it, and once you adopt that mindset, you will be amazed at how much more comes in. There is one more trick hidden here. When you cut back beans but leave the roots in the ground, those roots still carry nitrogen-fixing nodules. As the roots decompose, that nitrogen feeds whatever you plant next. Even after the second harvest, the beans are still working for you underground. It is a closed loop, and it is exactly the kind of thing the Amish figured out generations ago. Now here's the bonus tip I promised you, and it is about making the most of the very end of your season. Amish gardeners do not let the first frost wipe out their garden overnight. When frost is in the forecast, they cover their still producing tomatoes, peppers, and squash with old bed sheets, burlap, or lightweight row cover fabric. A single layer draped over a tomato cage can buy you 1 to 2 more weeks of harvest, and in a good year, those extra weeks add up to a serious amount of food. The cover traps just enough ground heat overnight to keep frost off the leaves and fruit. Pull it off in the morning once the sun is up and temperatures rise. This costs almost nothing, just old sheets and clothespins, and it is the difference between losing 100 green tomatoes to the first cold night and ripening them on the vine, where they belong. I have gained as much as 3 extra weeks of harvest this way, and those late season weeks are some of the most productive of the entire year because the plants are fully mature and loaded with fruit that just needs a little more time. Do not let one cold night end your season early when a bed sheet can keep it going. Thank you for sticking with me through all 7 of these Amish harvest tips. If you only take one thing away, let it be this. The harvest is not a single event at the end of the season. It is a daily practice that starts the moment the first fruit is ready and does not stop until you decide the season is over. Pick early, pick often, feed your plants when they are working hardest. and never let a productive plant go to waste. I would love to know which tip you are planning to try first, so drop a comment and tell me. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. I have got a lot more practical gardening advice coming your way every week. Until next time, get out there, pick something, and happy growing, friends.